right, another beautiful day has come, right, Fernando?
Yes.
And what we have behind us?
A big truck.
That's correct. We've already put a system in this, and by system I mean we've added a subwoofer in it already. And so what we're doing today is we're actually taking that out and we're replacing it with a 5-channel amp and a bunch of new speakers. Sounds like fun, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
All right, so let's take a look and see what we had in it and what we're taking out of it.
I can't.
Same thing.
I can't. I didn't take a look at it.
Come on, man, hop up there and change the battery.
Good.
All right, so anyways, let's take a look and see what we're taking out of it that we'd already installed and then what we're replacing it with. So we had installed in it was this guy right here. This is the X601 Kicker, and this is the factory Sony amplifier because it has the Sony premium sound system. We're gonna put a bunch of Focal speakers in it, and also we're gonna add the AmpPro, this guy right here. The Kicker amp is going to be replaced by this guy, the XR 900.5. So we just went ahead and pulled the full install that we'd previously done because we know it's going to change drastically at this point. For one, we're not going to be doing high level to low level, so we can go ahead and pull that out. We're also just, the AmpPro comes with a bass knob, so we're going to go ahead and put that where we had the Kicker bass knob. As you pickup truck guys are probably aware of, you guys' trucks leak an awful lot. So check this out. This subwoofer box is soaking wet. Now when we do one of these, we of course pull this out and we cover it up to make sure that that doesn't leak, but I'm guessing that this right here is probably because either this or the third brake light is leaking and getting down here onto the carpet. We're gonna go ahead and put some legs underneath it to make sure it's not sitting on the ground. You know, he's gonna take it to the dealer and see if they can fix it, but we just want to make sure that we get no water. So let's go ahead and get our amp taken off of its mount and figure out how we're gonna mount the new Kenwood. All right, so we have our amp all set up. We have our terminals exposed. We have our preamp check, like I've said before. We just set everything for their desired function. So front is high pass, rear is high pass. We've set everything to 80 Hertz as just a preliminary. We've turned all the gains down and the subwoofer bass boost is down. So this is how we set up each amp before we put it in as a preamp setup. Now what we need to do is figure out how we're gonna mount this guy onto here. We're gonna go ahead and run new speaker wires, even though the amp is right here. There's really, I don't wanna cut the harness just to put 4 speakers in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna run our left and right signal for the rear, and then of course we'll run our left and right signals for the fronts. So we just need to make sure this fits. So we're gonna go ahead and mount this back in the car and see if this guy will go. So this is how it was sitting previous. We have the amp, Sony amp mounted here. We have this guy. We're gonna go ahead and mark this where we need it to be and make a panel to mount the amp. All right, we have our amp mounted. Now we're gonna start running our wires. Before we start wiring up the amp, we're gonna take a quick pause and pull the factory radio out, plug in the AmpPro. We remove the radio, the glove box, and the knee buster because the plan is to run the RCAs down the passenger side of the car, power wire down the driver's side of the car, mainly just for space because it's a lot of wiring. Plus we also have speaker wires coming up both sides. What we want to do is try to figure out if we can put the AmpPro like above the glove box because it's tight in the dash. There's not a lot of extra room for the AmpPro. But since we're talking about it, let's take a look at it. For this we're going to use the AP4 FD21. Now we've used these before and we've talked about them a bunch of times, but for those of you new to the show, let's check it out. So this will only work if you have a Sony system, and this is the brain here. This is the preamp. It's not a high level to low level, it's a full preamp that talks to the car through this T-harness and gives us a full 5-volt full bandwidth output. If you need a digital output, that's what this guy here is for. You can buy an optional Toshlink adapter, so you can plug in like a bit processor or something like that. It's got 4 dip switches here. Those correspond to page 2 right here. Now basically what they're asking you is if you need something other than a 5-volt output or if you're troubleshooting. We're just gonna put a piece of tape over it so that they don't get bumped if somebody reaches or whatever in the dash. So it comes with this bass knob here. Now you do have to use this, whether your amp has a bass knob or not. You don't have to use it per se, just turn it all the way up. You can tuck it in the dash, but this has other features for the AmpPro, so at least has to be connected. It comes with like a 6-foot cable for the bass knob. Now the T-harness is pretty straightforward. It goes behind the radio. It has a male and female end, and then it has the end that goes over to the unit itself, which plugs in right here. Now once you do get this plugged in, you're going to plug all the factory stuff back in, shut the car, lock it, and let it sit for 10 minutes in order for it to resync and wake up and do all that fun stuff, talk with this brain, and see what its new life is going to exist like. We're going to go ahead now and just get this mocked up to where we hope it'll go, and then we'll actually do that part once we plug it in. The other thing too is right here, this is the blue-white, so this is your remote turn on. Alright, slight change of plans. We're not going to go behind the glove box. What we're going to do is actually, this has this package tray right here. We're going to go underneath this package tray. There's plenty of room up here for it. So there's a bar right here, and this is something factory mounted, but there's plenty of room here. So we're just gonna, I'm going to make a panel that's going to screw into this and mount this guy right here. Alright, so we got the panel. We're going to go ahead and get this mounted and then mount it in place and get the harness all set, ready to go. Alright, so we have our unit mounted. Now, one of the things on this that minor oversight, I'm guessing, is that the sticker to tell you what these unnamed RCAs go to is on the bottom. So once you mount it to something like this, you can't see them. So do yourself a favor and go ahead and Sharpie on what they go for here. Hopefully one day they'll address this. Alright, so let's go ahead and plug this into the unit. Alright, so our harness is ready to be plugged in when we're ready to do it. Alright, so now let's go back over and wire up the amplifier. Alright, so with the amp all wired up, this is the Sony amp, just in case you were wondering. We have to plug that back in. The reason why is because according to Pac, it's needed to complete the data bus circuit, or the CAN bus circuit, whichever you want to call it, in the car, so they leave that plugged in, unlike their competitors who take the amp out. No big deal, we've already got room for it, so it's just going to go back in. We already had the fuse holder mounted from our previous install, so all we had to do is bring in our power wire and connect it. We already had made a nice mount for it, so we're good there. So we have the back all put back together. Subwoofers in. What we're working on is the front door speakers. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, do we run new speaker wires? And if so, how do you get them through the boot? And a lot of the times you just can't, because there's giant Molex. So we talk about getting the wire in the kicks. We're gonna show you what we do. So what we have in this door is this mid-range here, along with this tweeter. Now over here in the kick panel, there are the wires that are running into the door. So there's a tweeter wire and there's a mid-range wire. And what we've done is we've run our 16 gauge up, that's this wire right here. And now what we're going to do is connect this 16 gauge to these two pairs of wires that are running into the door. So if we had an outboard crossover network, we would connect our wiring here, mount it somewhere up in the dash, but we're going with the integration series, so I'll show you those in a minute. The other thing we need to do is with the AmpPro and the Fords, if you want to retain the cool factory chime, you need to put a load resistor on the front two speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and solder up one of those. Now before you ask, it's one of these weird things right here. It's a 47 ohm 5 watt resistor. What that's going to do is that's going to put enough load on the amplifier to make it think that it still has front speakers, which in turn is going to keep the factory chime. Now if you don't do that, it's no big deal. There's a piezo sensor in the dash that will allow you to keep the chime. It just won't be that nice smooth Ford sound that everyone, you know, knows and loves, I guess. Alright, so this is the resistor here. As you can see, it's fairly big. Now what you want to do is go ahead and get two pieces of wire. It doesn't have to be big. This is just 18 gauge. and go ahead and wrap it around the ends just like this. And you want to make sure the wire is of good enough length because these things are going to get hot. So you don't want to just tuck it into the existing wire and let it just get into the wiring harness. You want to make sure that it's far enough so that you can put it where there's nothing around it. You don't want it to cause any damage to anything else in the car. Solder this bad boy up here. Go ahead and add some heat shrink to it. Alright, so now we have these. What we want to do is just kind of twist this around like this. If you want to tape up the wiring, go ahead. Now what you want to do is make sure you put this somewhere where it's not going to get in the way or touch anything. In this case, it's going to go in the kick panel. We'll put it up against the metal. It'll be out of the way and get this over to Fernando. All right, so we went ahead and connected it up. Now nicely, this has this little hole right here. So we're just going to go ahead and tuck it in there so it'll stay away from everything. Let's take a look at these integration speakers. So we have the 6.5 integration. It comes with this crossover here that's going to get mounted to the speaker. And then you have the tweeters and they have their crossovers. So it's a two-part system. The integration, they separate them and make it a little bit easier for the install. Now, because we are going to be putting in a 6.5 or a 5x7 goes, we have these that are 5x7 to 6.5 inch spacers. Unfortunately, this 6.5 is a little bit bigger. It's got a hole that's this size. So what we need to do now is we're going to take this over to the router. We're going to make some new plates that have this hole and this shape. All right, so what we want to do is just take and put some template tape on here first. All right, now we want to go ahead and get a piece of plastic so that we can make a template. Alright, so what we went ahead and did is we made 2 1/8 inch and we're going to attach them so that we have a full 1/4 inch, and then it's staggered so that these screws will sit flush and won't get in the way of our speaker. So now what we want to do is go ahead and glue them together. Alright, so now we have what we need to get these into the door. We'll go ahead and let them dry for about 5 minutes, and then Fernando can go ahead and screw these in. Alright, so we have our RCAs ran up here to the top of our dash. We're going to go ahead and plug them in, and also we want to connect up our remote turn on. Alright, let's go ahead and get the top panel back on. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and unplug the factory radio and plug in our T-harness. Half of the T-harness goes into the radio, and the other half goes into the actual touchscreen. And there is plenty of wire for you to be able to do that. Now the touchscreen has 2 harnesses that plug into it. It has the big harness that's part of the T-harness, as well as the little USB. Now if you get it done and you figure out that the navigation system isn't working, you forgot to plug in the USB. All right, so now that we have the radio back in place, we have the T-harness in, what we want to do is go ahead and connect everything up so that we can lock the car for 10 minutes and let it sit so that everything can go through its wake up Okay, 10 minutes is up. Let's see how this thing sounds. He didn't have his balance and fader in the middle, so it was really loud in the rear. I'm like, what the heck? That's something you always want to check if you're doing this for a buddy or something like that, is to, hold on. What's wrong?
Remember the cartoon, the little dog
Yeah,
and the big dog?
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Spike.
Spike, you wanna play? You wanna play? You wanna play?
Anyways, you know, make sure you always zero out the radio. So like he had his treble up all the way, the bass was down. So go in and zero out the radio. Make sure everything's where it needs to be. Makes life a lot easier before you panic. All right, so we have all the speakers playing. Just did a quick check on that. Now what we want to do, as you can hear in the background, we're gonna do a polarity check. There you go. It should all be red. Now, when we use the phone for some reason is backwards and it lights everything up red. So, like we said, don't be concerned. Just make sure they're all the same color. So either all green or all red. All right, so all the speakers polarity check good. So now we move on to tuning it. One thing to note about the AmpPros is that they claim a 5-volt output, which it may well be, but what it is it doesn't clip. You can get full volume rotation out of it. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the balance and fader, and we're gonna fade this all the way to the front, because all we want to hear is the front speakers right now. All right, so that's all the way to the front. We'll go back. It's your favorite song, guys. Go to the settings and put it back in the middle. Oh, this is one we haven't heard yet. Little customer tune time. Alright guys, there you go. Satisfied customer. We're gonna finish this one up and get it outside. As usual, you guys have a great night. We'll see you next time. Next job, tomorrow, whatever. Whatever I say at the end of these shows. You know what I say. Alright guys, bye.